Hello, everybody. Another mini proof lesson leading to another commonly asked 4 point question. Well, not so commonly asked anymore, but definitely possible 4 point question. I can prove rectangles, rhombuses, and squares using the two rectangle proofs. That's congruent diagonals and a right angle. The three rhombus proofs. That's perpendicular diagonals, diagonals that bisect the angles, consecutive sides congruent. And understanding that a square is both, it must have a rectangle proof and a rhombus proof. So we're going to start with the multiple choice. That's not the objective of this lesson, but we need to understand the multiple choice before we can do the proofs. So again, these are all parallelograms. A rectangle is a parallelogram with one of these two. A rhombus is a parallelogram with one of these three. A square must have one of these and one of these. If I tell you that it's a rectangle, then it needs a rhombus property. If I tell you that it's a rhombus, then it needs a rectangle property. If you don't know these properties, you have zero chance of doing this. So you really need to know your two ways to prove a rectangle and your three ways to prove a rhombus and how it all comes together. A parallelogram must be a rhombus when? Well, one of the three rhombus properties. I'm looking for one of those three. Boom, diagonal's perpendicular. A parallelogram must be a rectangle when? Well, I'm looking for one of the rectangle properties. It must be one of those two. Diagonals are congruent. A rectangle must be a square when? If it's already a rectangle, it needs to be a rhombus, so it needs one of the rhombus properties. Consecutive sides are congruent. A rhombus must be a square when? Well, it's already a rhombus. If it's already a rhombus, then it needs a rectangle property. It needs one of those, a right angle or congruent diagonals. There's your right angle. A parallelogram must be a rhombus when? Well, it needs one of the rhombus proofs. Diagonals bisect its angles. A rhombus must be a square when, well, if it's already a rhombus, then it needs to be a rectangle. It needs one of the rectangle properties. I've got diagonals congruent. So you need to understand all this. And if you understand all this, it's really not a big jump at all to go to this. Now, again, these are mini proofs. You're not going to see something like this on the Regents, but this is a stepping stone to get there. I want to prove a rectangle. Well, a rectangle is a parallelogram with either congruent diagonals or a right angle. Statements, reasons. It's already a parallelogram. If it wasn't, I'd have to prove it was a parallelogram first. Quick is a parallelogram. Given. All right. Well, now I need either congruent diagonals or a right angle. It's telling me that QI is congruent to KU. QI is congruent to KU. Given. So to prove a rectangle, I need a parallelogram. Check. I need congruent diagonals. Check. So now I can state that quick is a rectangle. The reason it always starts with the shape. A rectangle is a parallelogram with congruent diagonals. If I prove the right angle, then I would say that a rectangle is a parallelogram with a right angle. It's whatever property you prove. And that's it. Okay? In order to prove a rectangle, I need it to be a parallelogram. I need it to be one of the two rectangle proofs, either the congruent diagonals or the right angle. Once I have that, I can state that it's a rectangle because a rectangle is a parallelogram with whichever one we proved. Parallelogram, it wants to prove that PQRS is a rhombus. Well, to prove a rhombus, I need to first prove it's a parallelogram. Check. And then one of the three rhombus proofs. Either diagonals perpendicular, diagonals bisect the angles, or consecutive sides congruent. PQRS is a parallelogram. Given. Check. That's one thing I need. Now I need either perpendicular diagonals, diagonals bisect the angles, or consecutive sides congruent. It says that PR is perpendicular to SQ. That's diagonals are perpendicular to each other. PR is perpendicular to SQ. Given. I have a parallelogram. I have diagonals perpendicular to each other. Therefore, I can state that PQRS is a rhombus. A rhombus is a parallelogram with perpendicular diagonals. That's it. That's the concept. Okay, if I want to prove a rhombus, I need to prove it's a parallelogram first, and then one of the three rhombus proofs. Almost done. These are quick. We're just going to go through two more. So I showed you how to prove a rectangle, how to prove a rhombus. Now we're going to go through the square two different ways. Meow is a rhombus. It's fantastic. Maybe I should name my cat Rhombus. That would be cool. Given. So it wants me to prove a square. A square needs to be a rectangle and a rhombus. It's already a rhombus, so I need the rectangle. I need one of the two rectangle proofs. Once I have one of the two rectangle proofs, I can state that it's a square. So I'm looking either for congruent diagonals or a right angle. MO is congruent to WE. Those are congruent diagonals. MO is congruent to WE. So I've got my rhombus, which supersedes the parallelogram. If it's a rhombus, then it's already a parallelogram. I got my rhombus. I got my rectangle proof. I can state that meow is a square. A square is a rhombus with, because that's what I had. I had that it was a rhombus, which rectangle proved that I do, congruent diagonals. And one more, pretty much the same thing, but not. Statements, reasons. Meow is a rectangle. I guess now I'm naming my cat Rectangle. That was funny the first time. It wasn't really funny other time. Meow is a rectangle, so if I want to prove it's a square, it needs to be a rectangle and it needs to be a rhombus. It's already a rectangle, so I need one of the rhombus proofs. I need either diagonals perpendicular to each other, diagonals bisect the angles, or consecutive sides congruent. It's telling me that ME is congruent to EO. Those are consecutive sides congruent. ME is congruent to EO. Given. So for a square, I need it to be a rectangle. Got it. I need the rhombus. Got it. Done. Meow is a square. A square is, well, it started as a rectangle with, which rhombus proof did I use? Consecutive sides congruent. If you understand this and you understand proofs in general, then you're ready for the final lesson. And if not, then you're not. So practice this, complete this assignment. That's it. Goodbye.